Excuse me. Welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council website, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask that all members and officers have their microphone on mute until they wish or are invited to speak? Thank you. I need to let you know that we are not expecting a fire alarm today. So if one does sound, please use the stairs to leave the building and convene on the field opposite the visitors' car park. Please follow the Democratic Services Officer for this. Thank you. I've received apologies from Mrs. Page, and I'd like to thank our very own Dr. Feltham for substituting today. Thank you, Dr. Feltham. Very kind of you. The first item is the minutes of the previous meeting, which is on pages 5 to 8 of your agenda packs. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of June are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everybody in agreement? Thank you. Item number 2. I have received no questions from members of the public. Item number 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7(3) and 7(5). I have received a question from Mr. Hunt. The question and its response has been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of this meeting and will be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussions are to be held on this. I will now invite Mr. Hunt to ask a supplementary question should he want to. I would remind you that your supplementary question, Mr. Hunt, should be to clarify the reply that you've been given and should not raise any further or new issues. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I've got no...
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. I will now ask the officers whether they are able to respond or wish to respond. Okay, thank you. Sorry. On to item 4. I've not been notified of any urgent items. So item number 5 is declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do any members have any interest that they wish to declare? Thank you. Item number 6 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? Item number 7, I have not received any petitions. Which brings us on to item number 8, our first substantive item. It's a report on biodiversity net gain, 6 months on. For your reference, this is on pages 9 to 12 of the agenda pack. Judy Thomas, Head of Planning and Historic Natural Environment, and Vanessa Evans, Ecology and Biodiversity Team Manager, join us today to present the report. So over to Julie and Vanessa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to give an insight and a little bit of a summary of biodiversity net gain and its new requirement, its new legislative framework, and where we've got to 6 months on. So the law for biodiversity net gain has been in place since February 2024. That was for larger development sites with a slow introduction into smaller sites after that. So essentially, the purpose of biodiversity net gain is to introduce a requirement that every single planning application received post the date of mandatory net gain should have 10% biodiversity net gain applied to it. This applies to all planning applications unless they are exempt. The statutory instruments provide detail on exemptions, and we have a policy guidance from the government that has been issued to help us to interpret the new statutory instruments. However, we are still developing our processes and procedures, and it is important to note that 6 months on, we still have further work to do to make sure that we are introducing it in the right way and that we are fully compliant, if you like, with the legislative framework that has been given to us. What I would perhaps highlight is that there are some gaps in that. Some of those gaps are intentional in the sense that they're allowing us to, the government has put the legislation together to allow us for some local interpretation. However, as we go through and receive planning applications, what is happening as we're working through those and working through the processes, we are finding there are also some issues that perhaps haven't quite been met by legislation. So it's a question of identifying and dealing with those as we go through the process. So we did know this was coming. As a profession, we've been working with Biodiversity Net Gain, which has been shortened to BNG, for over 10 years. The evidence-based and measuring process for that has been developed during that time. I've moved here from a county that was a pilot area, so that was Warwickshire, so we've been working on BNG for that length of time. What is demonstrably different is that we have never worked at a 10% level, so we've been using all of the materials and the evidence base and the dephrometrics, etc., but we haven't been applying those to a 10% scenarios. This is very, very different for us as a profession and as as part of the planning process. So in order to prepare for this in Leicestershire and Rutland, before I joined the county, a collectively commissioned report was produced. Now, that was funded using burden funding collectively across all of the local planning authorities in the area. The work was completed by RSK Biocensus, which is a consultancy, a private consultancy who have very good reputation in this area of work. I completely sort of objectively, because obviously I wasn't here at that time, I think that was a really good decision, and it's provided us with almost a roadmap really to try and get BNG up and running across our area, and that is what I continue to follow while I put all of the measures in place. So Charnwood Borough Council and Leicester City Council, they have their own advice services. So although they're not taking part in the Memorandum of Understanding and contractual arrangements that we are part of and that we deliver for other boroughs and districts, they are nevertheless still part of that partnership. That has largely been led and driven by the Planning Officers Forum. Now, the Planning Officers Forum is the cross-county group looking at planning processes and is attended by heads of planning and planning service leads. So it really has been done in quite an organised and collaborative fashion. And that's the way that we are continuing to try and apply this and to get the procedures and processes in place. So as part of this, since I was appointed just before Christmas, I've continued to attend those planning officer forums and to update and get feedback on the processes as we take them forward. I've also been asked to set up a BNG subgroup of the planning officer forum, which I've done. The reason for this is that what we are trying to achieve is we're trying to interpret the legislative framework collectively and consistently across our area, so that if an application comes in, it's dealt with in just the same way, regardless of where it's being dealt with. And that includes trying to get that across Charnwood and City as well. So they are also part of that BNG subgroup. So, for example, we are dealing currently with validation requirements and Section 106 obligations. These are two really key areas where we've been given some freedom in the legislation to try and look at what we want to do and what we want to deliver locally. What that means in practice is that we are trying to get shared guidance on what a planning application needs to include when it is submitted, and whether it is validated at that point or not depends upon what's been included and what we've requested. The Section 106 element of that includes a brand new requirement that we all have to monitor on-site delivery of BNG. This is a completely new area, and it is likely to be a large proportion of resource in terms of staff time and duration, because every single agreement that is put together for BNG must endure for 30 years. So you can imagine it's been quite complex trying to develop a policy and charging schedule for that that everybody can sign up to. So monitoring, so that's the monitoring requirements. There are also reporting requirements that come with this. It is actually coming through the biodiversity duty, which also has its root in the Environment Act in the same way as BNG did. So you'll see in paragraph 9 of my report how I've highlighted that they both come from the same root. And although we are required to report as part of the biodiversity duty requirements on us as a county, the BNG element of that, my own team will be feeding into the biodiversity duty requirements. At the moment, we haven't had any detailed guidance on that yet. We're still waiting for it. The very sort of basic words of the guidance and the instrument are that we will be looking at recording quantity of habitats created, enhanced, created or enhanced, type of habitats, broad areas of location, although that will also be covered as part of our nature recovery strategy, which the BNG model links in with. Moving on just to consultation and training. When this first came in, obviously it's a lot of additional requirements that needs to be understood by decision makers and by members of staff taking part in the planning process. So we have we've already done officer and member briefing sessions and training sessions. What we've also done is we've extended that to parish and town councils, and I also did some additional educational work, if you like, or awareness raising at the annual conference in July, which was a really interesting experience for me to understand what parish and town councils' interests in BNG were. That was a very useful exercise, and I'm planning on, and certainly I'm doing some follow-ups. They're planned in. So as far as resources is concerned, I think really in terms of service delivery, this is really the key area. It is a very demanding new requirement. At the same time as we are recruiting and retaining, doing recruitment and retaining work for new staff and the team growth, so is every single local planning authority across England. That makes it very, very difficult to recruit. In addition to that, we are also fishing in exactly the same pond as the private sector. So because the planning application processing now includes a large element of BNG, private consultancies are having to recruit as well. And it has always been difficult in the public sector to compete with the private sector offer. So we actually have an issue not just with recruitment, but also retention, and it is really key to getting the service to be, delivered in the way that we would like it to be delivered. There's also an upskilling element. So if you're an existing ecologist, however senior you are, this is a very new area of work, and there's a lot of technicality to it. Not just the dephrometric itself, which is essentially just a very advanced and complex spreadsheet, but there's also a new requirement for habitat surveying and monitoring, which is not what the sector is used to. So in the past, we've used different methodologies for habitat survey and monitoring. So that's an additional really important upskilling area, not just for the delivery of BNG, but also for the review of the BNG in the planning process. We must have, competent professionals who can understand condition assessments, which is what they're called, when they come in, for us to be able to monitor BNG on site. If we don't have that skill in-house, we can't do it. So in terms of outputs and outcomes, it is too early at the moment to give examples of the beneficial impact on the ground of BNG. I don't foresee that being something we can easily demonstrate for some time yet. One of the reasons for that is that the whole process of BNG plus the legal obligations that are related to it is slowing down the process before it reaches us. So there are applicants who have sites that, and this is, to an extent, this is anecdotal, but we are also seeing it. So what we're seeing is that if an applicant has a portfolio of land, for example, that has been purchased or they purchased it some time ago, they're now reviewing that land for BNG before they put it to development. Can they deliver BNG if they bring that development site forward? And if they can't, if it's too constrained, what can they use it for? And I'm sure you can imagine some of the answers to that may lie within the BNG itself. So if they can't build on it, can they use it as a BNG offset site? So there's quite a lot happening behind the scenes. We're seeing some of it coming forward, but I really think that sort of hard impacts of this, where we can actually take a group of elected members out to site so that they can see what's happening, it's some time yet before we'll get there. But we will get there, and then I think it'll be really interesting for people to see, the results of decisions that are being made at for example, planning committees and planning decisions, to see what's happening on the ground will be, I think, very helpful for everybody, including myself. To actually see it on the ground will be helpful. So in terms of just basic figures, these are basic because we're only just getting up and running our database system with its monitoring element in it. I've put there a picture of where we are with BNG applications with BNG required, applications that are exempt. That in itself is an issue at the moment because we are still working through what exempt actually means and its interpretation from the statutory instrument. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what's happening. So in terms of conclusions, certainly I would say that we're early days yet. I am a big supporter of BNG, having worked for about 20 years without any kind of habitat framework, only working with protected species. So I really want to see this working well, but the devil is definitely in the detail, and we are working our way through it, as we speak. I'd be more than happy to come at a later date and update again. But please, if there's anything you feel's missing or that you need to know, let me know. That's about it for me, I think.
Thank you, Vanessa. And equally, we'll be more than happy to welcome you back here again. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Julie if there's any additional comments that you'd like to make. Thank you.
I was here mainly because I was involved before Vanessa joined us with the RSK works. If anybody had any queries on that, I think we're in a very good position going forward. We've done an awful lot of work throughout the service area. We are still waiting for legislation to come through to find out exactly what we're doing. But what we did with the RSK work was they put forward 26 recommendations, which covered the whole scope and remit of BNG. And what we focused on in the early days is getting us safe and legal from day one to provide this service. So that involved looking at the structures, looking at the initial processes, and I think we're now in the area where we're looking at the next set of recommendations, and then there will be a further set after that about whether or not do we put any of the county council's land forward to offset BNG on other sites. So it's a phased approach to it, but I'm very pleased with where we are at the moment.
Yes, I understand we're in quite a favourable position, actually. I know there's still probably more unknowns than knowns about some of this. I've got some questions of my own. I'm going to invite members to put their questions forward. I'm going to invite Mr. Payne, who is lead member, to add anything, sir. Thank you.
No, I don't have anything to add. Just to say a thank you to Vanessa and the whole team for putting the infrastructure. Well, actually, Vanessa's enhanced the infrastructure, but the infrastructure and the foundations for this work. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a local authority, so we manage government processes, and this is a policy enacted by the last government, and it's one intended to make sure that we leave this part of the earth in a better condition than we found it and live with it. And time will tell whether that's achievable or not. But you've made good progress since you've started to discharge the responsibilities. And I look forward to receiving future briefings as to how this pans out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. I invite questions. Mr. Harrison, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vanessa, well done. It's a lovely report and in depth as well, because obviously we look at a sheet of paper and don't quite understand it all. And that was most enlightening. Reading the paper, I was pleased to see S106, but then I just briefly offside had a brief word as I was collecting some water, and I realised then, and you've said it again, that it isn't just a visit, it's visits and visits and visits. So whatever that S106, it's not going to stretch all that way around, is it? Or is it? I don't know. I've no idea how you do that. But I'd be interested, because in my notes I put down, I wonder how big this market is. But anyway, so I'd be interested just for confirmation of that. Thank you.
Would you like to respond, Officer? Thank you.
So in terms of securing biodiversity net gain, there are two routes. You can use a conservation covenant or a planning obligation. If the applicant uses a conservation covenant, they have to approach a responsible body. At the moment, there are only 6 of those registered in England. I'm sure you can imagine they're fairly busy. And that process has been very, very slow. Now, as an alternative to that, for off-site or significant on-site creation of biodiversity net gain, that can be secured with a planning obligation. So what we're doing at the moment is we're developing a Section 106 policy and charging schedule. That is drafted. The draft is complete. I'm now going to take that through internally so that can be adopted and accepted as a process. What I have done is had a lot of help from our obligations manager, who is also doing his own protocol for Section 106, and therefore what I've tried to do is mirror that, because even though our requirement comes from a different legislative source, it seems sensible, in my view, to try and mirror the process that we already have for Section 106. Now, the guidance does give us some framework. So, for example, your concerns about visits, it does provide us with a framework for that. We have set 2 and then in 5-year increments. So all that has been costed in and incorporated. There are a few, perhaps 3 or 4 other authorities in the country that have already had theirs, up and running just about there. So we've been looking at those as well. To try and get the best way of doing things. But this is something that we've never had to do before, and there will be an enforcement element to this as well, and we still don't have any guidance on that, and that's is something that we're waiting to hear. Essentially what we need is to know that we can feed into the enforcement process if this does not go to plan. So although we can go out and we can charge this purpose of the Section 106 is that we can charge for those visits, we will do that work, but then if there's a difference between what we expect to see on the ground and what is actually delivered, we then need to forward that through into the enforcement process, and that's the bit that of the jigsaw we don't yet have from national government.
Thank you very much. Yes, Julie, if you'd like to add to that, thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that the discussions to date with regard to enforcement is we wouldn't actually undertake it. We would support it and we'd help provide evidence for it, but it would be the districts that use their enforcement teams and their resources to enforce.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Actually, before I go to Mr. Bolton, thank you for that. My question was, what powers do we, as a county council, have in terms of enforcement, legal obligations and the like? Because we're actually working with statistics now. It's 10%. Before it was just it was a non-existent figure. I mean, are you optimistic that in the future we will have powers of enforcement to ensure that they actually do meet their obligations?
Unlike planning, BNG is a statutory requirement, so it's already there. We just need to know the detail of it, and that's what we don't have at the moment.
Oh, that's reassuring, Julie. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bolter, for your patience.
Thank you. Well, one question was an enforcement I was going to ask, because it's nice to see the county working with the districts for once. The districts will validate the planning application. No doubt they will be enforcement of that planning. So where does the county come in with that? So if the districts enforce the legislation, how's the county involved in that? I'm also concerned, like I said this morning, about various species that don't seem to be protected in the new legislation. I talked about hedgehogs, swifts, badger gates, all ways that wildlife can actually transfer through different areas of the countryside, because as we're building on more time, so more fields will be taken up, these natural corridors would be removed. Big builders like to remove hedgerows as soon as they move on the site to clear the land. So hopefully this will stop that, because they would have to fund even more, bigger cost to them to start taking hedges out, but also concerned that the wildlife now won't be able to move from one site to the next unless provision is made in these corridors for them to move. So that's the other question. So, and also on-site inspections, no doubt it'll be the local planning authority who does that. It's their planning application. So they start the enforcement. So where does the county come in with all this?
By all means, thank you, Vanessa.
There's a few elements in there, facets, if you like, of your question, which I don't want to lose, but I'll answer the enforcement question first, if that's okay. So essentially, that is what we are currently devising. We have a memorandum, an MOU, or a contractual service with our districts and boroughs. So in effect, when we are doing ecology advice work, we are acting on the behalf of that local planning authority to offer advice. The purpose of the Section 106 process is that in our contractual agreement with those districts and boroughs, we will carry out the ecological elements of that monitoring. What we would then do is make recommendations to their enforcement team. So the enforcement team would pick up the enforcement work. So in the past, when we've worked with enforcement teams, we are quite familiar with this pattern. So it is something that we've done before, albeit not with BNG. So if, for example, it was protected species, we would make a recommendation and then the enforcement team would pick it up, and then we would do a back and forth, if you like, between them. So we are only advising. So if we go out to site and we find that the ground proofing demonstrates that it's, you know, not what was expected, not only will the Deframetric allow us to actually do that in a very evidence-based way to say this is what we expected, this is what we've got, we can then provide that evidence to the enforcement team and they can you know, carry out that enforcement work. The bit that my understanding hasn't yet been confirmed in terms of funding support is the enforcement element. So we have, if you like, the ecological element covered in our service level agreements, plus the policy and the charging schedule element. We will also apply that in-house to our planning work. So the minerals, the waste, the hospitals, the schools, we would apply exactly the same principle to those planning applications as they come forward. So that's the sort of the enforcement element. I would very much like to pick up on this, the protected species element, if I have time, if that's okay. So
no, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. So essentially, the work that we're doing on BNG comes from a completely different route historically from all of the work that has always been in place for protected species. The protected species protection has not gone away. So when we look at any application that comes across our desk, we will continue to deal with the protected species issues that are already in place. So all of that legislation hasn't gone away. What we're doing really with BNG is we're looking at ecology in habitat terms, which is slightly different. A very long time ago, I think it was 2010. I might have to check that. There was a government report, the Making Space for Nature. It was very well received at the time and very well researched by Professor Lawton, who is a real, top of his game essentially as an ecologist. And the strapline that came from that was more bigger. Essentially, it was a very long time ago, but the history of BNG has come from that. It's about the fact that we cannot, unless we connect and create habitat through this planning mechanism, we are not going to meet what we need to do for wildlife across our country. And that's so it's almost coming as an additional element to protected species. But I do agree that we would, it would be desirous to have more protection for species that are in decline but not legislative protected species, and the swift and the hedgehog come into that category. Unfortunately, I think it's highly unlikely that will happen anytime soon, unfortunately, and we have to continue to tackle those things through the planning system in the way that we currently do, by looking at design. Essentially, for example, hedgehog records in a place, we will continue to try and design and modify in order to support that. But obviously, it's not as ideal as having protected species legislation for an individual species that's in severe decline.
Mr. Bolt, are you happy with that, sir?
Yes and no. Okay. Okay, so we need to get some public behind the clarification about hedgehogs and swifts and other things that are in decline to get them as protected species. Blake will say in a few minutes the county council done something about swift boxes. I'm sure he will do. But that's the thing that concerns me. And just as a final shot, Chair, I assume there won't be a charge to the districts for this advice from the county council.
So we have the equivalent of service level agreements for districts and boroughs. So we are a costed service. So we are offering ecology advice as a costed service.
It will cost the districts for your.
Yes.
And sorry, Mr. Seat. No, it's okay. So, did you wish to raise a comment? Sorry, we didn't hear Mr. Seat. Could you put your microphone on? Sorry, I know it was an aside, but
I apologise. That additional cost, I am presuming, but I've had head shaking the other way, that the additional cost would come out from the S106 money, but that is not the case. So where is the money coming from?
Yes, I'm conscious that we could get into all kinds of granular modus operandi of all of this. So yes, please, if we could have a closing remark on this, thank you.
So so the original report by RSK was an investigation using burdens funding from the government as to how we would deliver BNG. We already had an advisory service in place for districts and boroughs. That was already a paid service. So we, in effect, are their advisory officers on ecology. If they didn't have us, then they would have to buy in-house in order to discharge the requirements for ecology advice. For example, protected species. So Charnwood, for example, and City, they have in-house staff. So we are the bought service for the districts and boroughs that buy into that. And the RSK report essentially was a feasibility of how that would function. And they identified that we would have a service in county to deliver that would have growth in order to accommodate BNG.
Are you happy with that response, Mr. Seaton?
Yeah.
Thank you. Members, any additional questions that need to be? Dr. Feldman, thank you.
Basically about the training, probably because I'm left out of all these things. I vaguely can remember the all-member training. I think I was chairman at the time, so I probably went. I'm actually particularly interested in parish and town council training. I seem to remember that the 2 occasions that you've reported here were here at County Hall. There's quite a large number of, I don't know what the percentages, of parish and town councils that never ever come to training at County Hall. It's too far away. It's often in the evenings when their staff have already given up work for the day. And I just wonder if it could be done by teams, that's all.
Thank you, Vanessa.
It's my understanding that the events that we held at County Hall were hybrid, and the recordings are available. In the case of the parish and town councils, I went into one of the operational meetings and did a session with clerks there. I also did the annual conference in person, which was at County Hall, and I think that recording is also available.
That's literally, obviously, despite the fact that the planning authorities at district level, parish councils quite often, like the county, are consultees. And if the parish councils haven't a clue what BNG even stands for, then it's not going to help a lot. It's just, I think it needs more. Because certainly when I'm on 2 parish councils, and I'm aware that none of those parish councils even have a clue what we're talking about. I try to tell them, but and I think a team session, then they all join in on that. It's just, and I doubt if anyone would bother to look at a recording because they can't ask questions. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Feltham. Vanessa, I would just like to ask one final question. And again, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for your articulate and robust responses. I feel confident that you are very invested in this as a vocational area as well as other issues. It's about the monitoring, really, because we've got 30 years. 30 years of monitoring seems like a huge investment to make at the front end. When you say monitoring, is that actually on-site monitoring where you're actually going to physically look at this? And again, it's all about the money. How will that be funded? Who's going to actually go out in the wellies to make sure the newts are safe, is what I'm asking, really.
So the charging schedule that's currently in draft, that is the framework, if you like, for the 5-year interval monitoring exercises. The monitoring is the responsibility of the applicant in BNG. So they have to sign up to commit to a 30-year management plan upfront. And the monitoring that we are doing, this is a little bit odd and can be difficult to get your head around, but essentially we are monitoring the monitoring. So what happens is that they have a very tight management plan that they need to adhere to, with expectations of the condition of the habitat at each point in time. That information will come to us with an indication of whether what they are trying to create on that land is in line with they predicted. What we do then is we receive that information, all of the technical dephrometric, the condition assessment, we make an evaluation of that, and it includes a site visit. What we're not doing is we're not evaluating it from scratch. That is the responsibility of the applicant, and the legislation's really clear on that.
Okay, I am going to go to Councillor Payne in a moment, just slightly disconcerting. So you are monitoring the monitors. So am I right in assuming that we are one step displaced from the chalk face? We are responding to what we're being told rather than what we are witnessing. Is that correct?
What we're receiving, we then need to ground check. What we can't do is, accept a report that says, oh, this is a wonderful habitat, it's created exactly as we were hoping, and just accept that. Sadly, we can't do that. We can't accept that at face value. And that's why we now have a new responsibility for monitoring on site. And that's essentially what we're designing now. It's the ability for us to have everything we need in resources terms, including trained staff, to be able to go out on site and do that.
Excellent, because if I was the monitor and you asked me how's the monitoring going, I'd say it's all going just dandy, thank you. Councillor Payne, thank you. Oh, I beg your pardon, Nick. Councillor Chapman, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on this monitoring for 30 years. Say 15 years down the line, it's absolutely gone horribly wrong. It's all died. Where does the money come from then to replace that if the developer's suddenly gone bust?
So it's the responsibility of the applicant, you're quite right. In the case of it going bust, there is a legal framework. Well, these are some of the details we haven't yet seen, but essentially under Conservation Covenant, it's the responsibility of the applicant, and if not, it can be enforced upon them. And through Section 106, the same. How that's going to pan out with respect to the situation that you've described there, I'm not sure we really know the answer to that as yet.
Are you satisfied with that, Mr. Chapman?
Well, satisfied. It's obviously not the answer you wanted to hear, but actually, we don't know what we don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to respond to 2 points. The first is Bill Bolter's point about the swift bird population, and I think it's quite an opportune moment to say how much we do as a county council to promote grants that we receive to already benefit and enhance our environment. Last year, we received a grant of around £77,000 from Natural England to promote spaces for, in particular, swift birds to reside. So there's a decline in the population of swift birds. I think it's around 53% between 1995 and 2016. And this grant is well oversubscribed. So sadly, I have to inform you that the application for the grant has now closed. But if members wanted to apply for the grant, they saw and they would receive information. But the whole of the £77,000 for this year has been subscribed now. There's been a lot of interest from members of the public. I've received many emails. I have to say, all of us as county councillors, we receive emails and communications from our constituents in a variety of areas. But in all my 20 plus years of being a councillor, it is this portfolio that I receive by far the greatest amount of communication with regards to environmental concerns. And when we promote these grants, they're very popular in Leicestershire. The second thing I just want to pick up on is this notion of how we fund our services here at Leicestershire County Council. And I think Vanessa explained very well some of the challenges in terms of how we administer and manage the statutory legal processes that the government have put on local authorities. And in one sense, all local authorities, as has already been explained, are competing for the skill sets needed to discharge this legal responsibility. Whilst I would assume that it's within the gift of any local authority to go out to the private sector and procure services and the skills they need to educate them and inform them about these policies and also help them enact the delivery and execute these policies. It makes absolute sense to me that we use the skill sets that are within the sector, the public sector, and in this very specialist sector. And for that reason, I think it's right that the borough and district councils, who ultimately will be deciding and permitting these applications, do buy in and commission these services from a central hub such as the Leicestershire County Council. I think that's economically sensible, and I think that's in the best interest of the decision-making process as well. So I'm not going to make any apologies for the County Council, given the financial challenges that we actually have charging for such services. Our job is to make sure these services are delivered well and they're of such a quality that our service recipients benefit from them, and I think they will be under this leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. And from a personal point of view, I'm delighted that the fund has been oversubscribed, which means people who care and they're invested and they're taking the demise of our natural bird life quite seriously. So no, that's good. It would be disappointing if it was the other way, that was no interest whatsoever. So Vanessa, it's a fascinating and informative and robust report. Thank you very much. Thank you also to Julie for helping to field some of the questions and some of the clarity that you've given it. I appreciate there's possibly more unknowns than knowns at this current stage, but I'd like to thank you for coming and spending the afternoon with us at this committee. You're very welcome. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes section 8, biodiversity net gain 6 months on. I'll now take us on to item number 7, if you will, and that's the Environment and Climate Change Performance Report to June 2024. Sorry, 9, I beg your pardon, 9. This is on pages 13 to 22 of your agenda pack. Anne Carruthers, Director of Environment and Transport, will present the report. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Anne, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. This is a report you're very familiar with. You see it twice a year, so I will give you the highlights of what's changed this time around. It's the reporting period to the end of June 2024. If it's different from that, I'll let you know. And in that period, there's been 15 performance indicators that have had an update, i.e. there's been data available to update on from the previous report. First up, and similar to previous committees, is the EV charging locations per 100,000 population, and that continues to improve, which is really positive, and I'm sure the committee will welcome. That is up 13% on the previous quarter, so you know, a real rise, and it is continuing that upward trajectory. Progress, however, we're still in the third quartile of that, so some way to go. But I would caveat that, and I'm sure the committee is aware because I'm pretty sure we brought to you before information about we have access to government's Levi funding, which is funding to support the rollout of EV charging infrastructure. We are part of a pilot project and a wider project across a consortium of authorities across the Midlands, and over the next, I would say 5 years, there will be a substantial increase in charging infrastructure across the county, so that will boost that indicator. Similar story for EV ownership, which has improved by 7%, but again remains in the third quarter. So, you know, we've still got that upward journey to make. If we look at energy efficiencies of new homes, that's in the top quartile and it hasn't moved since last time. However, there was a slight drop in performance for the energy efficiency of existing homes, and that's dropped from the first to the second quartile. Just as a reminder, we don't have a lot of direct control over this. We have some influence through the likes of the home energy retrofit offer and the grant there. However, you know, we have limited direct influence on that indicator. If we turn to carbon emissions, we're looking at carbon emissions per capita. That improves slightly with emissions down by 7%. Just a reminder though, that data is to 2022. It's 2 years in arrears. It's issued by government. So, you know, we just have to work to their timetable on that. Carbon emissions from transport within the local authority influence declined in performance by 4%. It's still below pre-pandemic levels, however, so hopefully we don't see it continue to decline in performance, but I just wanted to highlight that for you. We are still in quartile 2 for that, so you know, reasonably, you know, we're above average basically was what that means. Contrary to the transport emissions indicator, the greenhouse gas emissions from all sources in Leicestershire improved with a 4% decline in emissions. And when you look at that per capita, there was a similar improved performance and we saw a 6% drop in emissions again, so that's positive to see there. Tree planting. We always like to see how our trees are doing, and we're doing against our commitment of 700,000 trees. Well, we're actually doing really well on that because in the trajectory, because that was over a 10-year period, we're currently at 437,000 trees, and actually where we should be at this point in time is 210,000, so we're way exceeding that, so it's really positive news there. Long way to go, but really positive in terms of that trajectory of that journey. Finally, just looking at the waste performance indicators, the only changes have been improvement for the percentage sent to landfill. That's reduced from 18% to 15%. And the percentage recycled from LCC sites has improved, and that's gone from 62 to 64%. And that's actually the best performance we've seen over the last year. So a high note to end on. So that's all I wanted to pull out, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Anne. Again, very, very positive. Before I ask my leading question about ash dieback, as I like to, I'm going to ask our lead member, Mr. Payne, is there anything you'd like to add to Anne's report at this stage, sir?
No, it's a familiar report, so we should open it up to questions. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome, thank you. Mr. Hunt, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. several of the indicators are classified as we can do something about this or we can't do something about this, and that's understandable. The director drew attention to the domestic properties with energy performance certificate C++ of existing homes. Gone down a tad, but the main thing is that the insulation and quite a topical issue at the moment, will continue to be. Is there something that we can add to the box of tricks that we've got? And is it something that we will keep a close eye on in order to take advantage of schemes that may come up from the new government? I've got another one. Shall I add to that? Or
Mr. Hunt, perhaps it'd be opportune for officers to answer the first bit, especially with regard to the box of tricks that we're all fascinated by. So we'll start perhaps with that. Thank you, Anne.
I think in short, the answer is yes. We'll always look to see what else we can do to support on that. As I did mention, we have, relatively small element of direct control on that, mainly coming through public health colleagues and, the grants that become available to them to administer for residents to improve on some of those things that will help retrofit properties. It's a massive job, isn't it? The age of the housing stock across the country to retrofit that. So, it is going to be one bit at a time, really. There will be progress in the right direction, but it's not going to be quick. But in terms of the local authority ourselves, the county council, we would certainly look to uptake any opportunity to support residents in doing that.
Mr. Hunt. Mr. Hunt, could I ask you just to put your microphone on, sir? Thank you. Mr. Hunt, you need to give it with a degree of confidence, sir. Thank you. That's perfect. And again, thank you. Thank you, sir. That's fine. Oh, no. If you press it again, thank you.
I keep my finger on it permanently, I think. Okay. Sorry. Just to summarise the point, we're concerned about the apparent sort of static situation of waste to landfill. We'd anticipated that waste to landfill would shoot down. That's the word, isn't it? With the advent of an incinerator within the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna.
Through you, Chair, and I'm not touching the microphone again. I think just two things. Landfill figures to come down, it's a lot of waste to move, but they have come down from near 30% to 15% in just a couple of years. So it does include the large facility that's near yourselves at Junction 23. And we expect that to improve further. But in the last few years, it has substantially shifted from 30% of all of our waste going to landfill down to 15% and 3% drop in the last period that we're reporting on. And the other thing I'd say is in the joint waste strategy that we've all committed to with the districts, our ambition is to get, and it's going to be a really tough ask, but at the minute that is still our ambition, is to get it down to 5% by 25-26. So there's a lot to do in the next year. So that's the sort of full effect, hopefully, of some of the changes that we've done on incineration. And that's 10 years ahead of the national target, which is to get it to 10% by 2035. So we've set quite a stretching target for ourselves, but we'll have to see if we can meet it.
Are you happy with Walter? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, page 18, item 24. 65% recycling by 2035. We've got a long way to go, haven't we? And also the on item 26, 5% to landfill by 2025. That's another quite a long way to go. Are we confident we can achieve these targets?
Thank you, Joanna.
Through you, Chair, am I? So the targets are not for the County Council, to be clear, through you, Chair, they are for the Waste Partnership, so that includes the districts.
Yes.
We've talked at the last meeting about all the legislative change that's coming, and we're committed to sort of embrace and support that where the districts get their burdens funding or the support for it. Food waste rollout is the next major opportunity for a waste stream that's currently in residual waste to be moved out of the waste stream. That will have an effect. It won't get us to 65% necessarily when we model the waste strategy, but if you combine it with a lot of other things that are also coming, like extended producer responsibility, the fact that we've got to start looking at things in the next 5 years around carbon-based activities, things like biogenics in waste, you're going to see the composition of waste change. So we've talked in the past about things like lightweighting, so the thickness of a can is now much thinner, so the weight in your residual waste is much less, and it's normally based on weight performance. That's all going to change in terms of how you monitor things. So the answer is I can't tell you that for sure, but the waste strategy that was produced for the partnership recognised all of that sort of compositional analysis and some of the legislative change that's coming. And the ambition is that it will move us substantially towards 65%. And I think, Chair, I've already mentioned, obviously, the stretching target on getting landfill to 5%.
Joanna, it would appear to me that the trajectory is in the right direction from what I'm reading here.
Through you, Chair, yes. I mean, the commitments are European in nature, so we had to transpose them into the UK. They're substantial, they're really stretching. Councillor Payne's mentioned the Environment Act. There's a huge amount of legislation that's coming, and I think until we can fully understand what that looks like and what and where it will be supported financially across the two tiers of government, it's going to be really tough. But I think that the ambition is there to move waste up the hierarchy and not just see it as a resource that ends up in a hole in the ground.
Thank you, Joanna. Councillor Bolter, is there anything you'd like to come back on?
Yes, it's all very well and good, but if we're going to reach these targets, we need assistance from central government. I mean, we talk about food waste collection. They've only committed to the capital for that at the moment, not the revenue. Now, unless the revenue comes from central government, it isn't going to happen. As on the beginning, we said, you know, if we're going to do this, it must be the capital and revenue, not just the capital. So they're keeping very quiet about the revenue side. But okay, money's been given to all of the vehicles. Whether they arrive on time is a different matter because manufacturers are being pressed by everybody to provide the vehicles. Well, somebody's going to be disappointed, I'm quite sure. But if we don't get the revenue, it's not going to happen anyway because no district council can afford to do it. So, you know, that's the problem with the food waste. Other things are coming in, as you say, producer responsibility and all the rest of it. I've not seen some of the big delivery people changing their packaging yet, like a certain well-known online retailer. Their packaging still seems to be as much as ever it was. I hope somebody's talking to them about it fairly soon.
Sorry, John, just before you answer, I mean, do we have any authority to go back to some of these big distributors who box within a box to which Councillor Bolter alludes, and do we have any influence or any say in the way that is? Because I'm sure we all have our frustrations, the Russian doll frustration of opening the box to find another box with more boxes on the inside.
On the last point, Chair, there's going to be don't quote me on it, but there's going to be an organisation established, whether it's as part of government or independent of it, and it will be their job to mediate, to manage the relationship between the producers, the packers, the fillers, their compliance with paying penalties or contributions into a fund. And then they'll also have relationships with ourselves, for example, as an upper tier disposal authority where we manage the contracts for Recycle It. And what we're picking up the cost to manage the recycling will be compensated through the fund on the people who are producing that problem for us at the end of the line, but it won't be central government, it will be an organisation that's established. And there is still communications that is still being progressed, and the formulas, we just haven't had anything in writing that we can then sit down and work out if the maths and the assumptions that we've made are correct. So that's still pending. And I suppose the only other thing I'll add on, I'm trying to be careful around the sort of the difference for this committee between district issues and county issues. But from a partnership perspective, we are aware that the districts, yes, have had their capital allocations to a substantive level unless they've disputed them. And they've all been published, so they're public records, so we can all see what Ordby's received or Harborough. Whether it's enough, I won't comment, because I'm sure the districts themselves will have a view on whether it's enough in terms of the formula that's been given. And the new government has been quiet at the moment about the revenue payments, but we're expecting the spending review, and at the moment this is absolutely my personal opinion, we're just having to work on the basis that it would be fairly fundamental U-turn to say, can we have the capital back? And we're no longer progressing with the scheme, because the burdens funding did also commit the districts to receive revenue funding on an ongoing basis, but that information is still pending. So if you were speculating, the risk arguably is one of potential delay, I guess, but we don't have anything to confirm that there will be a delay, so we're still waiting. Last point for me is, I probably should have made it really clear, is that 60%, 65% performance isn't a locally set. It's not saying that Leicestershire County Council has to achieve 65% in every other county area. It's a national, so it will take into account areas that exceed and or underperform. So it's a global target, as opposed to Leicestershire has to get to 65. But the point is still valid. There's a way to go between 40 something.
Thank you, Joanna. Before I refer to Councillor Payne, Mr. Bolt, are you satisfied with the response that you received there, sir?
Chair, you should know me by now. I'm never satisfied, but
it's always worth asking, isn't it? You know. Thank you, Mr. Bolt. Councillor Payne, thank you.
Just 2 points from me. The first is just to expand on what Joe's mentioned about the districts already being provided with capital from government. Please note that the County Council hasn't had such capital provided to it, yet we have capital costs and infrastructure within the waste stream, and not least it costs us a lot of revenue to coordinate and organise and play our full part in these partnerships across Leicestershire. Secondly, I just want to agree with what Bill Bartle said, and I think as a general principle, it doesn't matter what colour a government's in at any point in time, if there's new rules and regulations, they should also provide the resources to the local authorities to execute those rules. For far too long, over many, many decades, governments have created new rules, come to the dispatch box in the House of Parliament, pass them off some kind of innovative idea, etc. But what they seldom mention is the cost of operating those rules, which often fall upon the local authorities. And to be able to afford to put those new rules into progress, we have to cut back in other areas. So I will still campaign with this government, as I did with the last government, where new rules are generated, they should resource and fund those policies. Thank you.
Councillor Payne, I don't think there's anybody in the room that can dispute anything you've just said there. So I think that's a prudent and satisfactory conclusion to that item. Moving on to, sorry, Mrs. Eaton.
The problem of waste, and I just wanted to share this thing with you at the moment. I'm on a parish council, as lots of us are, and at the moment I'm having a little bit of a battle with 6 members of staff that won't empty that plastic bags into the bin. They just won't empty them. They throw the bags in. Therefore, it doesn't hold so much waste. And if I'm having that trouble with 6 members of staff that only probably empty them once a day, then the whole thing of charging for waste and responsible waste management is just a huge thing to be able to manage, isn't it? It's huge. And thank you for doing what you're doing, and keep doing it and pushing that up the hill.
I echo that, Mrs. Seaton. So there's some. Thank you. Yeah, there is something to be done around waste education. I agree with that. Unless there are any more questions on this item, colleagues, members, are we happy to move on to item number 10, which is actually our final item today, and it's the annual review of one of my favourite subjects here, Leicestershire Country Parks. It's on pages 23 to 28. I'm going to invite Jane Glasgow, Assistant Director, and Richard Hunt, Head of Catering, Hospitality and Country Parks. They'll comment on the report. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, colleagues. And I'll hand over firstly to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. The paper in front of members today hopefully gives something of a flavour of activity that's taken place in Leicestershire's Country Parks service in the financial year 2023 to 2024. What's really gratifying is that visitor numbers to our country parks remain really high and well above the pre-pandemic levels that we saw, quite substantially above for some of our locations. And although we've seen some changes in visitor behaviour, and we're not quite as popular as we were at the crazy peaks of the pandemic, the numbers are really high, and that's incredibly encouraging. It's worth saying gauging visitor numbers to open spaces is a notoriously inexact science. So what we've actually provided members with here is a flavour of the car parking numbers for a number of our sites. It's fair to say not all of our other forms of transport are ever possible, and there are also many residents who are blessed with having our country parks on their doorsteps, and so they can walk into them. It's very hard for us to capture that sort of data. Also very hard for us to capture data for some of our smaller sites where we don't have the car parking infrastructure. So it's fair to say the overall number of visitors is far in excess of what you'd see within this paper, but I think the numbers give us a really good indication of some of the bigger trends that we're seeing at the moment. This year has been really challenging as regards visitor numbers, particularly at Watermead Country Park, and we've drawn the attention to members within the report here to the scale of the challenge posed by flooding on that park. There are around 11 flood events that took place over the past year, some of which involved entire closure of the park, and I think it's a real testament to the work of the rangers and the volunteers at Watermead that every time the park was considerably damaged by floodwaters, with the mess that creates, they came out and once again litter picked the park and cleaned pathways so that residents and visitors were able to enjoy that site in the sure knowledge that it was probably going to get inundated a week or so later. The report also sets out some of the work that the teams have conducted in our environmental management work, particularly relating to woodland management and the progress we've made under our countryside stewardship agreement in that area. But the team have also been able to run a large number of events and engagement activities over the course of the year, which range from walks and tours through to well-being events across many of our sites. Particularly exciting was the inaugural Up to the Beacon sculpture trail at Beacon Hill Country Park, run in partnership with local arts organisations that brought, we estimate, around 24,000 visitors to Beacon Hill in the summer months, and we were really pleased to be able to undertake that activity. Once again, our work this year is only possible due to our rangers, but also the over 100 volunteers who support the service across our country parks in a wide variety of roles. We really won't be able to do what we do without them. Looking forwards into 2024 to 2025, excitingly, it's the 50th anniversary of the Country Parks service, and so already the team have been digging through the archives, through some of their photographic records and some of their land management records as well, to see how the service has changed over the years. So on our new Country Parks website and also our social media, members will be able to find lots of examples of how things have changed over the past 50 years of the service.
Thank you. Jane, is there anything you'd like to add at this stage?
I think it's a real testament to the team, to be honest, that we've been through a very, very tough period with the pandemic. And through that process, the rangers, the volunteers were heavily engaged with the public, with our residents of the county, and managed to evolve as we went through that period and maintain those numbers. And I think it's a real credit to the team service and the volunteers that they've managed to achieve that.
Thank you. I concur. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Jane, sincerely. I think you do a tremendous job against a very difficult backdrop quite often. I invite lead member, Councillor Payne, just to add comment, and then Mrs. Seaton. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I don't have anything to add, but to thank the department. I think it kind of falls under the corporate resources portfolio, but it's good of you to come to the panel here and brief us as to where you're up to with the management of country parks, because of the environmental aspect of our country parks, not least the biodiversity, which we were talking about earlier. So thank you for a good report.
Councillor Seaton, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm blessed with Watermead Country Park and use it daily. I'd just like to bring your attention to the car parking figures for Watermead and how low it is for 2024. And although I probably know the reason for that, if you could just explain to me the reason and why it's not been mended, the reason, and how much revenue have we lost because of this?
Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
So the car parking system at Watermead Country Park was regrettably extensively vandalised in March, which has resulted in the entire system needing to be replaced, which is very, very disappointing. What we're in the process of doing, and I am told there is a 6 to 8 weeks and it will be in place. We're in the process of getting a upgraded system in place at Watermead, which will make a much better, more flexible car parking system for visitors there. So whilst it has taken longer to install than I think we might have hoped, the eventual end product will be an awful lot better than the car parking system we had before, which was far from ideal at Watermead for lots of technological reasons. This one will be far superior. So that's the background, and I do think it will be worth the wait in terms of what we'll get in terms of system. In terms of the lost income, there obviously has been a lost income. We will probably lost about half a year's worth of income from Watermead, which will probably be in the region of £45,000, something like that. Although we do expect a certain amount of that will be made up again later on in the year. So we're keeping a close eye on that. Key will be getting the new system in, which will help us to stem some of the lost income there.
Thank you. And just to follow up from that, so the people that pay annually, how will they be reimbursed, or will their annual fee be pushed on another 6 months, say, because they've been paying, they've paid up front for their car parking, and of course everybody else can go in for nothing, so they do feel a bit aggrieved with that.
I do recognise that there are some people who have commented on this. Obviously, our season tickets for Leicestershire County Council, I think is what you're referring to, are season tickets for all of our country parks. So they're not just season tickets for Watermead Country Park. And we don't just have a season ticket for Watermead Country Park. So it's not something where we could refund season tickets just because one individual park isn't available. So as I say, the park should be back with a functioning car parking system very shortly.
Mrs. Seaton, are you If not happy with the response, satisfied you've had a response. Thank you. Is there not a little sweetener we can offer them, Richard Records? But it would be. I do appreciate where Councillor Seaton's coming from, the people that have paid, and it doesn't take a lot.
Watermead stands on its own, really, and people that are using Watermead will only be using Watermead and not going to the other car parks, as with Beacon Hill. If you're in love with Beacon Hill, why go to Watermead, kind of thing? So I have a lot of comments, a lot of moans whilst I'm cycling through the park, and yeah, and I recognise the people, and I cycle faster now.
Perhaps we can offer them a good deal on a Swift box. Mr. Hunt, thank you for your patience, sir.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm also a fan of the parks, along with libraries and highways, wagons fixing potholes. They're one of our favourite products from the council. And, you know, we need that. We need to maintain the reputation of the council. And this is one of the excellent features of it. Yeah, I visit Beacon Hill, Watermead and Borough on the Hill. I think I've done that one, far away as it may be, and Market Bosworth, possibly not as much. So that's great. My fears are for the future. And I remember there was a period when we were looking around to sell off the smaller plots. I remember one was Altar Stones in Markfield, and we found that the Leicestershire Wildlife Trust took one of these things on. Are we in a position of holding all we have, or are we maintaining some plots, some areas which aren't attracting visitors and which perhaps need a different kind of management, which we might divest ourselves on? Just asking the question because I want to be prepared if that's going to be the case.
Officers, thank you. Thank you. Richard first. Thank you.
I think this is one that we discussed last year actually as well at Scrutiny, and I think, you know, back then we said there weren't any current plans to do anything different with the portfolio of country parks, and I believe that's still the case. Unless anything Jane wants to add.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, that's correct. There are no current plans to remove any parks at this point. We do continuously, of course, review the strategy as we're going along, but as it stands at the moment, the portfolio that we have is a viable portfolio.
Any other comments from any of the members? Thank you. Mr. Hunt, I do recommend you try the Stone Baked Pizza at Borough on the Hill on a Saturday night, because it's pizza night at Borough Hill on a Saturday night. You've got to give that a go. It's fabulous. Sorry? It might be getting a bit dark now, but it was lovely over the summer. Thank you. So no more questions on item number 10. Thank you. So item number 11, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, officers, for coming. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Richard. Thank you also to Anne and Joanna. Item 11, date of the next meeting. I can confirm that the next meeting of this committee is scheduled to take place on Monday, the 11th of November at 2 p.m. As I stated earlier, there are no further or urgent items, and I'd like to thank everyone, members and officers, for attending today's meeting, and I now declare the meeting journey home. Thank you.